Las Vegas Raiders defensive tackle Adam Butler is currently a free agent, but he recently expressed his desire to return to the team. Earlier today, he appeared on a podcast where he openly stated that he wants to re-sign with the Raiders. This raises an important discussion about his potential return and the team's defensive tackle situation moving forward. During the podcast, Butler sat down with Hondo Carpenter and shared his thoughts. He made it clear that staying with the Raiders would be a dream come true. He spoke highly of the organization and expressed his love for the team, saying he wouldn't want to play anywhere else. Given his enthusiasm, the Raiders front office should strongly consider bringing him back. Over the past few seasons, Butler has consistently improved. Last season, he ranked among the top 12 run defenders in the NFL based on Pro Football Focus's run-stop stats. While he may not be a traditional nose tackle who absorbs double teams, his ability to disrupt plays in the backfield has been impressive. Additionally, he finished in the top 15 for sacks and quarterback hits among defensive tackles, proving his value as both a run stopper and pass rusher. One of the biggest issues for the Raiders last season was the lack of cohesion on the defensive line. The team had key players like Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, Malcolm Kuntz, and Adam Butler. Yet injuries and other factors prevented them from fully coming together as a dominant unit. If the Raiders can keep this group intact for the upcoming season, they could have one of the strongest defensive lines in the league. Right now, Butler remains a free agent, and it's unclear whether the team will bring him back. However, he would be a cost-effective option compared to other defensive tackles on the market. At 30 years old, Butler has plenty of experience and has played at a high level in recent seasons. The Raiders should seriously consider re-signing him to solidify their defensive front. Adam Butler has been in the NFL for about 7 or 8 years, which isn't as long as some might think. Yes, he's 30 years old, but he isn't worn down the way some veteran players are. He entered the league later than most, spending extra time in college and developing at a slower pace. Early in his career, he didn't play as many snaps, which means he doesn't have as much wear and tear on his body compared to other players his age. One of Butler's biggest strengths is his ability as a pass rusher. He has the skills to win one-on-one battles against offensive linemen, making him a dangerous weapon for any defensive front. If you look at teams like the Los Angeles Chargers, they often use extra blockers to protect their quarterback. For example, they might have a tight end chip blocking Max Crosby, a running back helping on the opposite side against Malcolm Kuntz, and the offensive line sliding protection toward Christian Wilkins. This kind of strategy leaves Butler in a one-on-one matchup, and that's where he thrives. If you watch his tape, you'll see him succeed against top offensive linemen like Joe Thuney and Trey Smith. His quickness, speed, and explosive movement make him tough to block. He moves incredibly well for a defensive tackle, which is why the Raiders should seriously consider bringing him back. Another important factor is that not every player who joins the Raiders wants to stay long-term. Over the years, we've seen free agents come in, play for a season or two, and then leave. Even homegrown talent like Josh Jacobs chose to sign elsewhere despite getting a similar offer from the Raiders. That's why it's significant that Butler actually wants to remain with the team. I've personally spoken to Butler multiple times through social media, and he's a high-character guy who genuinely cares about his performance. He's not just in the league to collect a paycheck, he wants to be great. As former NFL quarterback Cam Newton once said, "Not every player is driven by a passion for the game. Some just play for the money." But Butler isn't one of those guys. Hopefully, the Raiders recognize his value and bring him back. He would be a key piece for the defensive line moving forward. That said, the team should also look ahead to the 2025 NFL Draft to see what defensive tackle options are available. Using data from the NFL Mock Draft database, we can analyze how prospects are ranked based on expert projections from sources like Mel Kiper. Let's take a look at some of the top defensive tackles coming out of college next year. Draft analysts like Jordan Reed, Matt Miller, and others regularly release mock drafts, giving us a general idea of player rankings. However, these rankings aren't always accurate. For example, when a high-profile analyst like Mel Kiper ranks Mason Graham as a top 3 pick, others tend to repeat it, even if it's not entirely justified. Mock drafts have shown in the past that they aren't 100% reliable, but they do provide a useful framework for discussion. Now, let's focus on the Las Vegas Raiders and their draft situation. The team holds the 6th overall pick in every round, including the first. The big question is, what position should they prioritize? If Malcolm Kuntz doesn't return, do they target a defensive end? If they need a quarterback, should they go after Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, or Russell Wilson? If none of those options work out, should they consider Shedeur Sanders with the sixth pick? Let's assume they address the quarterback position elsewhere. That leaves them with the option to either draft a defensive end or a defensive tackle with their first pick. Many analysts believe this is one of the strongest defensive tackle classes in years. If the Raiders do decide to go that route, Mason Graham is the name most frequently linked to them at number. However, I don't think he's necessarily worth that high of a pick. Some experts consider Mason Graham a top 3 prospect, calling him the best defensive lineman in this class. Personally, I'm not as high on him. When I evaluate defensive tackles, I compare them to elite prospects like Jalen Carter, who was a clear top 3 talent in his draft class. Carter had an elite pass rush plan, exceptional technique, and the ability to dominate on film. While Graham is strong and powerful, those traits alone don't always translate well to the NFL, where everyone is physically strong. That said, Graham could still be an option for the Raiders, though I wouldn't be surprised if he falls outside the top 10. If the Raiders decide to wait until the second round to draft a defensive tackle, there are some great options available. Even if they re-sign Adam Butler, they should still consider adding depth at the position. One name that stands out is Deone Walker from Kentucky. He's an excellent fit for the Raiders' defensive scheme. With Christian Wilkins locked in at the 3 technique spot, Walker could complement him perfectly on the defensive line. For the Raiders to strengthen their defensive line, they need a player who complements Christian Wilkins. Wilkins thrives as a 3 technique defensive tackle, but the team also needs a strong, physical player who can handle the 1 technique or nose tackle role. The key difference between these positions is that a 1 technique or nose tackle regularly faces double teams from centers and guards. These interior linemen are typically stronger than offensive tackles or tight ends, meaning the defensive player in this role must have exceptional strength and power. One of the best prospects for this role is Deone Walker from Kentucky. If he's still available in the second round, the Raiders should take him without hesitation. However, there's a strong chance Walker could be selected within the first 20 to 25 picks, given his talent and fit for teams needing a dominant interior defender. Even if the Raiders re-sign Adam Butler, Walker would be a valuable addition because Butler's playstyle is closer to Wilkins, whereas Walker offers something different. John Jenkins, another Raiders defensive tackle, is also set to become a free agent, and he didn't perform well last season. This makes it even more important for the team to find a big, disruptive presence on the inside. Walker would be a perfect fit, but if he's off the board, there are other solid options in this year's draft. Alfred Collins from Texas is another intriguing defensive lineman who could rise up draft boards as the process unfolds. He had a strong showing at the Senior Bowl and could be a valuable pick. Additionally, Cam Jackson from Florida is a player I'm particularly high on. At 6 feet 4 inches or 6 feet 5 inches and around 345 pounds, he's a massive presence. But what makes him stand out is his surprising quickness and solid pass rush technique. The Raiders' interior defensive line isn't as deep as their edge rushers, so adding players who can provide depth and contribute immediately is essential. If they want to build a defensive front similar to the elite units of teams like the Philadelphia Eagles, they need strong rotational players. A prospect like Cam Jackson, who is projected to go between the second and third rounds, could be an excellent addition. In my opinion, Jackson's draft stock will rise as we get closer to draft day, and there's no way he falls as far as pick 190. The upcoming draft offers several promising defensive tackle prospects, and the Raiders have a great opportunity to strengthen their defensive line. Identifying the right player will be key to building a dominant front that can control the line of scrimmage. Some intriguing defensive tackle prospects in this draft class are projected as late day 2 or early day 3 selections due to their smaller size. 2 players I really like are Omar Lott from Tennessee and Honest Pebbles. Both are solid football players, but they stand at just about 6 feet tall, which has hurt their draft stock. Historically, pass-rushing defensive tackles of that size have struggled to find consistent success in the NFL. We've seen shorter defensive tackles thrive before. Poona Ford is a great example at around 5'10 or 5'11. However, Ford is primarily a nose tackle who specializes in run defense. In contrast, Lott and Pebbles are pass rushers, and we haven't seen many defensive tackles of their size excel in that role at the pro level. That said, Pebbles had some of the best tape I saw from the Senior Bowl, winning numerous reps against quality competition. However, he did struggle in run defense, which raises questions about how well he'll translate to the NFL. If the Raiders can get Pebbles in round 4, I think it would be a solid pick. He could provide valuable depth as a rotational pass rusher, even if he isn't a full-time starter. Walter Nolan is another highly talked about prospect, but I don't see him as a great fit for the Raiders. While he's a talented player, I wouldn't take him with the 6th overall pick. Even if the Raiders trade down to pick 22, where he's currently projected, I still wouldn't be thrilled with that selection. Nolan has potential, but I don't think he'll provide the immediate impact the Raiders need from the defensive tackle position. The thing about defensive tackles is that it's often easy to predict and second who will be dominant at the next level. For example, when watching Jalen Carter in college, it was clear he was going to be an elite NFL player. The same can be said for Khalija Cansey, Christian Barmore, and Devontae Wyatt, all of whom were projected to be top-tier pass rushers, and they've proven that when healthy. Of course, injuries are unpredictable, but from a talent perspective, the best pass-rushing defensive tackles usually stand out on film. One player I would 100% target for the Raiders is Rick Herron from Oregon. He transferred to Oregon for his final college season, and while he wasn't a household name before that, he had a very strong year. Herron has good pass rush technique, strength, and the ability to disrupt plays in the backfield. Herron's play style is somewhat similar to Christian Wilkins, making him more of a 3-technique defensive tackle rather than a true nose tackle. If the Raiders run a 4-man front, this wouldn't be a major issue. However, if they want a true 1-tech, they might need to look elsewhere. That said, Wilkins is versatile enough to shift inside if necessary. Even if it slightly affects his production, he's still a high-level defensive lineman who can adapt. Adding Herron would give the Raiders another disruptive presence in the middle, strengthening their defensive front. If the Raiders can land a guy like Derek Harmon put in the 2nd round, they'd be adding a very talented defensive tackle to their roster. What makes this year's defensive tackle class so special is that it could rival the site's 2019 draft class, which featured elite players like Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, Jeffrey Simmons, and Quinnen Williams. That class was absolutely stacked, and this year's group might be just as strong, if not better. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if 7 or 8 defensive tackles are taken in the 1st round. One player who has really caught my attention is Darius Alexander from Toledo. He flashed a lot of potential at Toledo, but what stood out even more was his Senior Bowl performance. He dominated reps against some of the best competition in the country, proving he belongs in the conversation as one of the top interior defensive line prospects. Speaking of the Senior Bowl, it's a great way to evaluate talent. Players who perform well there often see their draft stock rise, and we've already discussed several guys who stood out. Some names to keep in mind: Alfred Collins, Texas, had a strong showing at the Senior Bowl and solidified himself as a potential day 2 pick. Junior Tanu, a standout at the Hula Bowl, and later received an invite to the Senior Bowl, where he also performed well. Cam Jackson, Florida, another interior defensive lineman who had a solid Senior Bowl week, showing off his combination of size and speed. Jordan Phillips had a great showing at the Carroll Shrine Bowl, another postseason event where prospects showcase their skills. One interesting aspect of the draft process is how social media narratives impact a player's hype. For example, Anna's Pebbles Gap had a great Senior Bowl, and yet he wasn't trending online like some other players. Meanwhile, other guys who didn't perform as well seemed to generate more buzz. This just goes to show how perception can sometimes overshadow actual performance. As the Sacre Raiders continue their offseason planning, they need to focus on adding depth to the defensive line. Even if Adam Butler still returns, the team should still consider drafting 2 defensive tackles. John Spidey, the new general manager, must ensure the team doesn't repeat the mistakes of the previous regime under Dave Ziegler, who missed on Jalen Carter. In the draft, drafted the wrong Byron Young. There were 2 in the draft, and they took the less impactful one, selected Neil Farrell Jr., who didn't pan out to build a dominant defensive front like the Philadelphia Eagles. The Raiders need to focus on bringing in young, talented defensive linemen who can contribute immediately. As the Raiders continue shaping their roster, one thing is clear: they must draft a defensive tackle. The class is deep and talented, making it the perfect opportunity to upgrade the position. While quarterback is an obvious need, bolstering the defensive line is just as crucial, I say. Even if Adam Butler returns. And with Christian Wilkins already in place, adding another dominant interior lineman would take the unit to an all-elite level. The best teams in the NFL win with dominant trenches. And if the Raiders and also hope to compete for a Super Bowl in the next 3 to 5 years, they need to make their defensive line one of the most disruptive forces in the league. In other news, Tom Pelissero reported that the Raiders and assistant GM Champ Kelly have mutually agreed to part ways. However, the reality is that this move is a decision by new GM John Spytek to clean house and bring in his own people. Champ Kelly was still under contract, meaning the Raiders chose to part ways, rather than him leaving for another job. Kelly had interviewed for GM positions, but he ultimately didn't land one, making this move even more interesting. Spytek is restructuring the front office, likely bringing in someone he trusts to handle personnel decisions. John Spytek played a crucial role in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers draft strategy. Even though he wasn't the general manager there, he was empowered to lead the draft process, and it looks like he will take the same approach in Las Vegas. Whoever Spytek hires as his assistant GM will likely have a lot of authority when it comes to drafting and roster decisions. This could explain why Kelly was let go. Spytek wants his own guy in that role. It will be quite interesting to see how Spytek builds this team, and whether his draft philosophy carries over from his successful time in Tampa Bay. A major decision for the Raiders front office is whether to draft a quarterback or target one in free agency. Thus, the Buccaneers, where new GM John Spytek previously worked, took the free agency route multiple times, signing Tom Brady and later Baker Mayfield, rather than relying solely on the draft. If the Raiders follow a similar approach, it could mean passing on a quarterback with the 6th overall pick, and instead using that selection to strengthen other areas of the roster. The same applies to the second round, where instead of drafting a developmental quarterback, the team could select a high-impact player like Jackson Powers-Johnson. This strategy could be a game changer, allowing the Raiders to get better immediately, rather than gambling on a young QB who may take years to develop. Free agency is approaching. With free agency just 3 weeks away, the Raiders' roster decisions will soon become clearer. As cuts begin across the league, several key moves may take shape. Gardner Minshew could be released, potentially making him a target for the Raiders. Trayvon Mullen, the team's top safety, is set to hit free agency. The Raiders must decide whether to re-sign him or let him walk. One issue in past years has been failing to retain homegrown talent. Players like Mohrig, Nate Hobbs, and Trayvon Mohrig should be prioritized to avoid overspending on replacements in free agency. Building a sustainable future. With John Spytek now in charge, the Raiders need to shift their philosophy toward developing and retaining their own players, rather than consistently looking to free agency for expensive solutions. The goal should be to develop talent in-house, extend key players before they hit free agency, avoid overspending on outside veterans. If the Raiders execute this properly, they can build a true contender and hopefully compete for a Super Bowl in the coming years.